Video number 4 today, and I'm going to continue with what I've written down in my most recent notebook, and then I'm going to go back to the last one, and then I still have another one. I don't know if I'll ever get back to this one, really. I think I'm saying the same thing over and over again, but I don't remember, so it seems interesting to me. Some people do talk about the same thing over and over again and they find it interesting. And that's what I do too, perhaps. And first thing I wrote down in this book is strategies for uninstalling the language virus program. One could be English prime, or E prime if you've heard of it. It is English without the verb to be. And it makes us a lot more sane, apparently. But there could be other strategies. The first thing is to acknowledge that our brains have been infected by a language virus, which means that language is using us. We're not using language. And part of what the reinstallation process looks like is being psychiatrized. It's saying, oh, you uninstalled the language virus program and you were operating based on that for a while, and that's not true. We're going to reinstall this language virus program, which is a program of using language by projecting it. So I won't go into that too much because I have these separate disjointed things here and I think I elaborate too much, especially if I want to talk about more and more of this. So maybe I'll try mostly reading it here. We are lost in a world of human emotion that enfolds human thoughts. We sense through the me of human emotion. So basically saying that the self is blocking the senses, because usually we sense things through how we feel about it, like our emotion. You know, and that could be a misinterpretation of what does that mean to me? What meaning does that have? We could create new meaning, or we assume it's old meaning. It means something about us, ourself. It means something about ourself. And the thing is, there's no self there. But when we think there's a self there, we think it means something about ourself. But if there's no self there, we create meaning. So we no longer have these stories of me as much as creating meaning. Hopefully that makes sense. It makes sense to me. And yeah, so we need to be conscious of the meaning that we're creating. When we're really conscious and awake, I think we create meaning. But we might not be aware that there's no self that's creating the meaning. It's the perception of the moment that's creating the meaning, and it doesn't require a self. So pure observation is participation, because in pure observation we see the moment, and when we see the actual moment we can participate with it. Can participate with what we're seeing now, not projection. And I do talk about this repetitively, which is because. Meaning, it's not meaning because like an effect or in a cause, but your presence is the only cause, which is acausal. The problem is looking for cause and effect versus unfolding eternity, not comparing it to previous experience. I wrote down event that changes the nature of reality, or question it. Now that doesn't make much sense, but I feel like I wrote that down because Steve Pavlina talks about how there could be an event that changes that changes how we understand the nature of reality. Right? So we see something new and then we're like, oh, reality works in a weird way. But I feel that there could be an event that changes the nature of reality. So there's something to be said about understanding something new and seeing reality works a bit different. Or by creative perception, we could actually change the nature of reality by changing our brain. So it's not just looking at something in a different way, but there's an event that changes the nature of reality. So it's a subtle distinction there in it, and in a crisis, that could be an event that changes the nature of reality. Not only our understanding of it, but it actually changes the nature of it. So, and we go into experiencing it in a completely different nature than we did before. And there could be many ways of that happening. It might not just be one thing. Another thing that Steve Pavlina mentioned that I found really interesting was he mentioned quickly that we can take responsibility on the objective, subjective, and pre-simulator experience. So you need to listen to his whole course to get all the goodies of what he's saying. But this struck me because in the state of so-called mania, I've had the sense of how I created certain events in my life on purpose. But it's almost as if I created it to be that way from the get-go, or seeing that it had to be that way. So if one can see it that way, then one loses certain guilt and shame about certain things, because it's almost as if we ourselves designed that to happen. And so that was kind of interesting to see it that way. And he has a lot of juicy nuggets. I think that his course is a really good one to extrapolate for oneself. So I don't purposefully set out to extrapolate things, but whatever I take in, I naturally have a co-creative perception with it. And there are certain things that other people can extrapolate themselves if they get into that type of meaning-making consciousness. And Steve Pavlina's course is a good one for that, and a lot of books that I've read too. I do want to do a thing where I read a book, and when I have an extrapolation, I just say it. So that would be something else to do, to read and say the extrapolation as I go. And in a way, show people how to read between the lines. And it's not that there's special messages, and this could be another way to look at special messages. It could be that one can extrapolate and read between the lines. So, there could be a word, like a sentence there, but we're seeing more meaning that is there, and it feels like a special message to us, but we don't understand that we're creating that ourselves. And, what is a special message? It's something that's meaningful, right? So when we assume that we're not a co-creator with our reality, but we're still lost in a bit of objectivity, we think of ourselves as an object receiving some meaning from some outside force. But there's really nothing there. Everything means what we create it to mean. And my problem with it is that we've been told what everything means, and then we objectify things and think we're looking objectively. But we can create our own meaning. So show people how to read between the lines. So it's actually more interesting to do that. I remember years ago when I would read, I would write down all the profound points. Now when I read a profound point and I create 2 or 3 of my own profound points based on that profound point, and it's usually related to my own experience in mental health and not necessarily directly to what they're saying. So they're acting as a primer for what I'm saying, but what I'm saying is actually something in a completely different subject. So I don't know if I've explained special messages in that way before, but that makes quite a bit of sense to me. And the transition from mania to depression or mania to psychosis could be seen as being set back from the universe. So getting set back, and that's okay. It's not necessarily a failure. And if we keep going, we can't fail. It's showing that, hey, I'm not going to let this keep me down. And the thing is, there's no self to keep down. So once the self goes away again, nothing can be kept down, because there's an energy and a creative force that arises. And there's something to be said about helping somebody through their process, but I also feel that by being in dialogue with each other and making meaning, we can share the same type of mind. We can share the same mind. So if I say something and somebody sees exactly what I'm saying and exactly what I'm meaning, they can build on that coherently. A lot of times when we're in conversation with people in general, we'll say something and then what they say back to us indicates that they didn't hear what we said, or they put the wrong meaning on it, or they misunderstood it. But I think when we're in meaning-making consciousness, we can also see the meaning that's been made. And we see that that person created it themselves, and then that gets our brain into creating meaning for ourselves too, which we're sharing. So the point of it is to share the meaning. So if I keep all these meanings to myself and they're not shared, well, that's not really that great. So I don't really know if it's a process as much as it is shape-shifting or interdimensional travel, or awakening the new dimension in the brain that other people allude to or talk about, and moving between the objective and subjective algorithm of the brain. And some of those algorithms also include seeing the future, like seeing if I keep going this way, it's going to lead to that. And a lot of times we don't want to see the future. We do like to be surprised. So the other thing I wrote down here is, a lot of times when we think, oh, that happened for a reason. Reason implies cause and effect. It's easy to just say that happened for a reason that I don't know. The other thing is we can create meaning. Meaning comes from our own ability to create. And our ability to create doesn't have a cause. It's our innate ability. So when we create something from acausal, then the more we create in an acausal way in our language and from the acausal space in the brain, the more we decouple from Newtonian, thinking in terms of cause and effect. And then we think in terms of blame and reward and punishment, all these things that aren't ultimately helpful. And they're not as powerful as other algorithms in the brain. And so one of the troubles in being psychiatrized is we're seen as objects. So we're being objectified. And we've just been returned often from a state of meaning. And we're not seen as sources of meaning. Subjective sources of meaning. We're not asked to share our subjective sources of meaning. We are objectified. And what they want to happen is that we get back to productivity and being a part of the economy. Steve also has this thing where he looks at things between three lenses of truth, love, and power. And he was talking about something, I don't know what. But what I extrapolated from it was that he was talking about power in terms of strength training. So you need to get strength training so you can lift more weight. And I realized that what we need to lift off of us is the weight of thought. And I do really feel that thought is tied into the field of consciousness, which is tied into the field of gravity in terms of weight. The field of gravity is related to weight. And so it requires a lot of strength training to get rid of those words that are marbled through our whole being, that marionette us. So how do we lift those thoughts off of us? They're programmed into us. And one of the ways I feel is to create our own meaning. So that meaning that we've created, and our ability to create meaning means that we don't require these thoughts to come in and control us and create habits of our living and things like that. So not only do we have to keep that weight off, we have to, the field of it is a weight that's on us, even if it's not falling on us. There's people around us that are projecting that weight towards us, and that they're trying to get us to see through the way that they see. So another way to look at it too is to help lift that weight off other people. So feeling that one is mentally ill and believing that fully is a huge weight. It's a huge weight. It's very heavy. And a way to make that lighter is, imagine if we didn't have to think anything about any of that. What if we didn't have any of that? We would be a lot lighter. And in that light, when we believe those thoughts are changing the way our eyes see the world and ourselves. So if those weights are lifted off our eyes and that fog of that is cleansed from our eyes, we can see the world clearly and create meaning from it. Saying that it's all a mental illness is meaningless. It makes us feel like our whole life is meaningless. So meaning, I feel, is part of the remedy. Making meaning. And these thoughts are weighting down our eyes and making us see a Newtonian world that is really solid when it's not necessarily that way. So, creating one's own meaning for oneself and speaking it out loud and seeing one saying it and hearing all the vibes of one's voice saying that, it kind of vibes out all those conditioned thoughts that we believe about ourselves that we've been told. And we're retelling ourselves something else that we've learned for ourselves. And that's more powerful than anything anyone can tell us to believe. So if somebody says, don't believe in aliens, and then someone sees an alien, that's going to be overpowering. And being in mania is seeing the alien. It's very hard to really convince us ultimately that we're ill after that type of powerful experience. Maybe not everyone feels that way, but I feel we need to give permission to people to think about it in the ways that they want, especially if it doesn't harm other people. It might harm psychiatry a little bit. They might not have as many profits, but the world might profit from having more profits. So, also, Steve talks about the concept of trusting the universe. And I don't really resonate as much with the word trust, but I would say that not knowing is trust, because if I'm completely okay with the unknown, then I'm naturally trusting it. So to be in contact with the unknown is trust. Otherwise, I'm trying to direct the world from my own will, and that's not trust. So, free will isn't really free because it's not trusting the intelligence of the universe. And I'm not going against things Steve is saying. What I'm doing is trying to extrapolate it to how I understand things, and using what other people say to deepen my understanding about what I've said to myself. And can we find other meaning makers, and can we create outlets for our downloaded information? Another person talked to me about how they feel like they get these downloads and they don't have an outlet for sharing it. How many people feel that way, that have had these altered states and feel like we've downloaded so much and we don't know how to share it, we don't have an outlet? Well, I realized that I have a lot to share and I don't have an outlet, so I created this outlet of talking to myself to at least have an outlet. Like, my point I was making to myself was to at least have a method of sharing it or saying it or giving voice to it. It just staying in a notebook is less powerful than it being on a video. And I also think we could create a game out of certain experiences. And I got this idea a bit from Steve. He might have said some of these things, like, what's the most positive reframe of that? What's the funniest reframe of that? What's the craziest reframe of that? What's the most loving? What's the most creative? So, I probably have some of them in here in my dialogue with myself, like funny reframes, crazy ones, positive, loving, creative. Some people might just say it's all crazy. And that's okay. And then I wrote, I'm like the ocean. Some parts of me are shallow and some parts are deep. And also, I was thinking in terms of psychological decision, which is related to judgment. So people say don't judge. I think another way to look at that could be saying don't decide. A projection from memory as a judgment is a decision, and it makes an incision in actuality. So don't let thought pre-decide. Stay in the emptiness. Don't project with thinking in terms of decision. So if I hear somebody say something and I think in my head, that's stupid. Well, I just decided it was stupid. So don't decide. Don't judge. And, because if somebody's saying something and then I say to myself, which I never do, I say to myself, that's stupid. Well, I've just denied myself the opportunity to co-create or to extrapolate or to make an analogy or to see something new or different. So decision and judgment is really limiting. And I was thinking of some things in terms of needing a higher dose of creativity. So what do we need a higher dose of that might be able to lower our dose of medication? And since I've been going backwards and forwards in these books, now I'm at the beginning of the Process-Oriented Approach webinar by John Harold. And one thing I like that he said, altered states in process work are viewed as gold. They wake us up to new ways of being and others too. Contain lesser known information about ourselves and culture. Something wants to be better known. And I wrote down, the universe wants to be better known or teach me something. And I feel like something is teaching me something and I'm able to learn from my own brain cells. And interestingly enough, he was trained in process work, whatever that is exactly, and he said that it takes 10 years to become good at it. And so maybe I really need to talk to myself for 10 years before I become good at it, whatever that is. I'm not saying that I'm a process worker, but I am doing something that seems a little similar. And yeah, and he talked about something that I've talked about with myself too. He called it process inversion, which is bringing some mysticism into everyday life. So having some in everyday life, and maybe having some in everyday life will lessen the big extreme states of it. I think that's true. I think that's why I haven't had really a big extreme energy state in quite a long time. The energy does come in and create more words for sure, but it doesn't get like all super exciting. I usually create more words and meaning, but I don't go out and create action and behavior as much. And but a little bit, I'm more kind and generous for sure. So I kind of like the ways that it changes me. And but I do think having maybe talking to myself the way I have has really helped me. I've done this self-dialogue. Self-dialogue implies you don't need anyone else to do it. And one day it'd be nice to have dialogue with people more, but whenever, like I'm going to wait for the universe to give me that sign and opportunity. I'm not going to push that. And I've had signs for sure. But one of the things is I do really need to remember, like, who do I want to spend my time with and who do I want to co-create with? And oh, I used another pen. One of the reasons why I feel I created the videos is so people can get whatever value is there. Sometimes I don't think there's any value there, but hopefully there is. And then I can go on and create the life I want. And if I want to spend my time around like a beautiful partner or something, well, then I can do that. And then this has been created passively. So it'd be really funny if somebody tried to watch all of it. I would really, really be amused. And I'm hoping the video might help some people who have recently been diagnosed and give them hope that hey, 7 years after diagnosis, your brain could be in a state of diagnosis, of speaking of the spiritual mysteries. I don't make a lot of this super spiritual. I think there is a spirituality for sure. It felt really spiritual the first couple times, but now it doesn't really feel as spiritual because I think the spiritual feeling is like otherworldly. And when you make the otherworldliness part of your daily life, it doesn't really have the same excitement to it. But it is rich and meaningful for sure, and very, very wonderful. You know, the richness of, I think on one of my videos I shared the pictures of the roses with the water on them, like that. I could look at that for hours, for sure. Not the picture, but the actual roses. And it's just so beautiful. What nature's created is so beautiful. And yeah, the power of the me versus the power of the universe. Well, which one is going to win? And it's not about winning either. And I think thought is a reactive agent, and the more we don't fall into that reactivity of thought, and we question and we have dialogue and we're a creative agent with our words, then each time we don't push against the mechanism of thought, then we can create this creative loop as opposed to this like push and pull resistance thing with reactivity of thought. And I feel, just looking at this bit here, sometimes when we're in that altered state of consciousness, we get to a point where we're like, oh my God, I have to tell others that they need to change now or else the world's going to explode in 10 seconds. And we're really trying to communicate the urgency of this change. And there's some truth to that, in that we can only change now. Now, this is something that Krishnamurti points to, where it's a radical mutation now or never, meaning that if we say, oh, I'll get to it later, we never will. There's no such thing as later psychologically. So his thing is to negate the whole structure. Well, you have to study the teachings to get it, but I do think that it could be that we're getting to the point where we're falling out of the state of eternity and the subjectivity of love, and we're trying to say to anyone around us, change now so I don't have to leave this beautiful subjectivity. Quickly change your consciousness to the beautiful subjectivity of love and we can all stay here quick. So we get kind of fanatical because we don't want to go back. But I think now I don't do that at all, because it's just a matter of like going back and recognizing the signs of going back to sort of dense materiality. So it's not a big deal. And I've talked about this before. John Harold said he felt like he was the Dalai Lama, cured cancer and was a genius or something, or won the Nobel Prize. But really that's a sign that we're in touch with the genius level of consciousness. And if we stayed in that level of consciousness or did long enough, we would probably cure cancer or create $1 trillion, especially in that state. We don't recognize that others aren't in that state too. So if all of us were in that genius state of consciousness, we would cure cancer. We would create $1 trillion to restructure the world and help others. And, we would all be like Dalai Lamas for sure. And he also, John says that we have trouble following the feedback of others. We can get better at that. So I'm throwing out some clues here. Clues to unlock the power of your own brain. To ignite our own learning and meaning making. And I'd like to increase my sense of comedy and energy, my sense of beauty. Well, I have that sense for sure. I can see a lot of beauty and meaning. And then I wrote down that spontaneity is a sense. It's something that happens when we sense the moment and act spontaneously. It's something that we don't premeditate. And premeditation comes from pre-thought. So in order to not premeditate, the senses have to be rid of thought. And I've talked a lot about that over the years.